If you grew up thinking you were simply too independent, too quiet, or too sensitive, there may be a deeper reason behind those behaviors. Some habits that look completely normal on the outside can actually develop when a child learns to manage emotions, needs, and problems without enough consistent support. And the important part is this: these habits don't prove you were neglected, but understanding where they came from can completely change the way you understand yourself. In this video, we're going to examine 7 everyday behaviors that psychology connects with childhood emotional neglect, including the subtle ways people learn to hide their needs, avoid asking for help, constantly read other people's moods, or feel uncomfortable receiving care. You may recognize yourself in some of these patterns. You may even realize that something you have always considered a personality trait could actually be a learned adaptation from your early environment. This video matters because understanding these patterns isn't about blaming your childhood or labeling yourself. It's about understanding the connection between your past experiences and the way you respond to life today. So stay until the end, because the final signs are often the ones people dismiss as simply being independent, mature, or low maintenance, when psychologically, there may be much more happening underneath. When people think about childhood trauma, they think about things that happened, the arguments they can still hear, the moments that left visible marks, the events they can point to and say, that is where something broke. But there is another kind of wound that works completely differently. It is not defined by what happened. It is defined by what never did. No one comforted you when you cried and did not understand why. No one asked what you were feeling and actually waited for the answer. No one reflected your emotions back to you so you could learn to recognize them as real. The absence of those things leaves no visible scar. It leaves something harder to find and harder to name. And the children who grow up in that absence do not usually know anything is wrong. They simply adapt. They build habits that look, from the outside, like strengths, like maturity, like admirable independence. And they carry those habits into adulthood, never connecting them to what they actually are. Survival strategies for a child who had to figure out how to need less. Today, I want to show you what some of those habits look like. Not to make you feel broken, but because understanding where they came from is the first real step toward finally being able to put them down. The first habit: you never ask for help. Society calls this self-sufficiency. It praises you for it. You are the one who figures things out alone, the one who handles a personal crisis without calling anyone, the one who would never dream of admitting out loud that you cannot manage something by yourself. From the outside, this looks like strength. From the inside, it is something else entirely. When a child reaches out consistently and meets indifference, distraction, or irritation instead of a response, the brain makes a calculation quietly, below the level of conscious thought. The calculation goes like this: asking for help leads to rejection. Therefore, I must become my own source of everything. This is not self-sufficiency. This is a fortress built around a very specific wound, the wound of having needed something and been left to need it alone. As an adult, when you refuse help, you are not just being capable. You are protecting yourself from the specific pain of having a need and watching it go unmet. The fortress keeps you safe. It also keeps everyone out. And the loneliness inside it is something that your independence, however real and impressive it is, cannot fix. The second habit: you do not know what you are feeling. Someone asks how you feel about something, and your mind goes completely blank. Not because you are being evasive, not because you are hiding something, but because you genuinely do not know. In psychology, this is called alexithymia, a disconnection between your body's emotional signals and your conscious awareness of them. Here's how it develops. In a healthy childhood, parents act as emotional mirrors. When a child cries, a parent says something like, "You are feeling frustrated because that did not work the way you wanted." That sentence does something invisible and essential. It connects the physical sensation the child is experiencing to a word, a label, a thing that can be named and therefore understood and processed. In a home where emotions were ignored or treated as inconvenient, that mirroring never happens. The child's feelings exist, but they go unnamed, unacknowledged, useless, so the child learns to disconnect, to mute the inner world, because feeling it produces nothing. As an adult, this becomes a life lived at a slight remove from yourself. You watch other people seem deeply connected to their passions and their pains, and you wonder what that feels like from the inside. You are not cold. You are not shallow. You simply had the wires between sensation and language quietly severed before you were old enough to know they were supposed to be connected. The third habit: you over-explain everything. You were 5 minutes late, and you give a 3-minute account of exactly why. You bought a specific thing, and you justify the choice to someone who did not ask. You make a decision and immediately build a case for why it was the logical and defensible one. From the outside, this looks like conscientiousness. From the inside, it is something older than that. When a child grows up in an environment where their needs and preferences were not inherently respected, they learn that having a want requires justification, that making a mistake requires a defense, that existing without a fully articulated explanation for every choice invites dismissal or criticism. So you learn to pre-defend yourself, to construct the argument before anyone asks, to make sure your choices are airtight before anyone has the chance to call them into question. You are not explaining yourself to the person in front of you. You are explaining yourself to a ghost from your past, a parent who never gave you the basic permission to simply be, to choose, to exist, without having to earn that existence through logic. The fourth habit: you apologize for taking up space. You apologize when someone walks into you. You apologize for asking a question in a meeting. You apologize for your home being slightly imperfect before a guest has even stepped through the door. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. For things that are not your fault, for things that are not mistakes at all. For the simple act of existing in a room and occasionally needing something from it. This is not politeness. This is what happens when a child internalizes, deep below the level of conscious thought, that their presence is an imposition. If you grew up with parents who were perpetually exhausted or disengaged or simply uninterested, you learned to shrink. You learned that the safest way to exist was to require as little space as possible, to be low maintenance, to never cost anyone anything they were not already freely offering. Every apology is a small version of the same sentence. I'm sorry for needing anything. I'm sorry for being here. It is the voice of a child who was taught, without a single explicit lesson, that their needs came second to the comfort of the adults around them. Stop here for a moment, because something needs to be said before we continue. If you are recognizing yourself in these habits, I want to be very clear about something. There is nothing wrong with you. There never was. Your brain did exactly what it was designed to do. It looked at the environment it was in, and it adapted. It built strategies to keep you as safe and as functional as possible in a situation that was asking too much from a child who had no other options. These habits were not character flaws. They were survival tools, and they worked. They got you here. But they were built for a world that no longer exists. And the weight of carrying them into a life where you are no longer that child is starting to cost you things you deserve to have. Stay with me. The fifth habit: you become a different person depending on who you are with. You are remarkably good at reading a room. You can sense a shift in someone's mood before they have registered it themselves. You adjust your tone, your opinions, your personality, the entire presentation of yourself to match whoever you are with. From the outside, this looks like social intelligence. In reality, for someone who grew up with emotional neglect, this is hypervigilance wearing the costume of charm. When a child's home does not provide a stable emotional baseline, the child becomes an expert at monitoring the adults around them. Not out of curiosity, out of necessity. They needed to know what mood the room was in before they could know whether it was safe, whether this was a moment they could ask for something, whether the ground was stable enough to stand on. You became a mirror because having a solid self was not an option that felt safe. And now, as an adult, you move through the world incredibly skilled at reflecting other people back to themselves. But in the quiet moments alone, a question surfaces. Who am I when no one is watching? The fact that the question is hard to answer is not a mystery. It is the direct result of never having your own traits and emotions reflected back to you during the years when identity was being formed. The sixth habit: you cannot trust your own judgment. Did I say the wrong thing in that conversation? Do my friends actually like me, or are they tolerating me? Was that decision the right one, or am I missing something obvious? The second guessing never fully stops. Not for small things, not for large ones. This is what happens when a child's reality is consistently denied by the people who are supposed to confirm it. When you said, "I'm sad," and heard, "No, you're not. You're just tired." When you expressed and it was dismissed or ignored or explained away, you learned that your internal compass was unreliable, that the signals you were receiving from inside yourself could not be trusted, and you started looking outside yourself for confirmation that what you were perceiving was real. That pattern does not disappear when childhood ends. It follows you into every decision, every relationship, every moment where you need to trust what you know and feel. The chronic self-doubt is not a personality trait. It is the absence of the one thing a child needs most to develop confidence. A parent who consistently said, "Yes, I see what you see. I believe what you feel. Your inner world is real." The seventh habit: you are everyone's support, but you disappear when you need help. You are the one people call, the therapist friend, the reliable one, the person who shows up, who listens, who helps carry what others cannot carry alone. And when you are in crisis, you vanish. You do not call anyone. You handle it alone, or you do not handle it at all. But either way, you do it without reaching toward another person. This is not because you are stoic. It is because somewhere in your childhood, you discovered that the only way to receive a positive response from the people who were supposed to care for you was to be useful. Maybe you took care of others in your family. Maybe you became the emotional support for a parent who needed you to play that role. Maybe you simply noticed that being helpful produced warmth, while being needy produced withdrawal. And you learned the lesson. Your value lies in what you do for people, not in who you are. This creates a life that looks from outside like remarkable generosity and feels from inside like a debt you can never stop paying. Because receiving care does not feel like love. It feels like a trap. You wait for what is expected in return. You tell yourself you do not deserve it. You find reasons to give it back or deflect it entirely. And you remain in the middle of all your relationships fundamentally alone. Hyper-independence that is really a fortress against being let down. Emotional numbness that developed when feelings produced no response. Over-explaining, born from never being allowed to simply be. Constant apology for the crime of existing. A self that shifts to match every room because having a fixed self felt dangerous. Distrust of your own judgment because the people who should have confirmed it consistently denied it. A life of giving that cannot receive because receiving was never safe. These are not personality flaws. They are not things that are wrong with you. They are the completely predictable adaptations of a child who needed more than they were given and found ways to survive anyway. But the environment that created them no longer exists. And the survival gear you have been wearing for decades is starting to cost you the very things you have always wanted most. Real connection. The ability to be seen in your wholeness. The freedom to have needs without shame. Healing from this does not start with a dramatic transformation. It starts with almost invisible steps. Saying, I would prefer the Italian place, instead of I don't care. You pick. Waiting 5 seconds before saying sorry for something that was not your fault. Letting someone help you carry something even when you could manage it alone. These habits were armor. And that armor kept you safe when you were too young to have any other option. You are allowed to thank it for that. You are allowed to put it down now. You are allowed to be seen, to be heard, to have needs that the people who love you will not experience as burdens. They will experience them as a chance to love you the way you deserve to be loved from the beginning. You were never too much. You were never not enough. You were a child who deserved to be noticed. And you still do. Which of these habits felt closest to your own experience? Drop it in the comments. Because naming it is not weakness. It is the first real act of seeing yourself the way someone should have seen you a long time ago. And if someone in your life carries this weight without knowing where it came from, share this with them. Because understanding it changes everything. And this is where the process becomes even more important. Because once you recognize these patterns, you may start noticing how often they influence ordinary moments that seem completely unrelated to childhood. You might be sitting with friends and someone asks what you want to eat. Everyone gives an opinion, but when it gets to you, you automatically say, anything is fine. You may genuinely believe you don't care. But sometimes the deeper pattern is that you have become so accustomed to adjusting to other people's preferences that identifying your own preference feels strangely difficult. It can happen with much bigger decisions too. Where do you want to live? What kind of relationship do you want? What career actually interests you? What do you need from the people around you? You may know the answers when someone else asks you what they want from you. But when the question is turned inward, everything suddenly becomes unclear. This is why learning to identify your preferences can be surprisingly powerful. Not because every preference needs to become a major declaration of independence, but because small choices teach your brain something important. Your preferences are allowed to exist. You can want the restaurant you want. You can dislike a particular activity. You can change your mind. You can say no without writing an essay explaining why. And you can say yes because you genuinely want to, not because you're afraid of disappointing someone. For someone who grew up minimizing their needs, these ordinary choices can feel much bigger than they appear. There may even be moments when someone asks you, "What do you need?" and you realize you have no immediate answer. Instead of seeing that as evidence that you don't have needs, consider another possibility. Maybe you became very good at ignoring them. Maybe your attention was trained outward for so long that looking inward feels unfamiliar. You learned to notice the temperature of the room before noticing the temperature of your own emotions. You learned to recognize someone's disappointment before recognizing your own exhaustion. You learned to ask, "Are they okay?" before asking, "Am I okay?" And eventually, that pattern can become automatic. But automatic doesn't mean permanent. You can begin reversing it through very small moments of awareness. When you're tired, notice that you're tired. When you're uncomfortable, notice the discomfort. When you want something, allow yourself to acknowledge the desire before immediately dismissing it. When someone asks for your opinion, give yourself a few seconds before automatically agreeing with them. Those few seconds can create something extremely valuable, a space between your old reaction and your present choice. And inside that space, you can begin discovering yourself. You may also notice that receiving compliments makes you uncomfortable. Someone tells you that you did a great job, and instead of simply saying thank you, you immediately minimize it. It wasn't that good. It was nothing. Anyone could have done it. You're exaggerating. Again, this may look like humility. But sometimes it reflects a deeper difficulty accepting positive attention. If you learned early that attention was inconsistent, uncomfortable, or mostly connected to performance, genuine appreciation can feel unfamiliar. You may know how to earn approval. You may know how to be useful. You may know how to perform. But simply receiving warmth without having to prove yourself can feel strangely vulnerable And that's another distinction worth understanding. Being valued for what you do is different from feeling valued for who you are. A child needs both. They need encouragement for their accomplishments, but they also need to experience something much simpler. You don't have to accomplish anything right now. I am still glad you're here. When that experience is missing, adulthood can become a constant attempt to earn what should have felt unconditional. You work harder. You become more reliable. You become the person everyone can count on. You solve problems before anyone asks. You rarely create difficulties. And eventually, people describe you as incredibly mature. But sometimes maturity and premature self-sufficiency can look almost identical from the outside. The difference is what happens internally. Healthy independence says, I can handle this, and I also know I can ask for support. Hyper-independence says, I have to handle this, because depending on anyone feels dangerous. Those two statements may produce the same behavior for a while. But emotionally, they come from very different places. And if you recognize the second one in yourself, the goal isn't to become helpless. It's to discover that independence and connection can exist together. You can be capable and supported. You can be strong and vulnerable. You can solve your own problems and still allow someone else to stand beside you while you solve them. You don't have to choose between competence and connection. Another subtle pattern can appear when conflict happens. You may immediately assume that you've done something wrong. Someone's tone changes, and your mind starts searching for the mistake. Did I say something? Did I upset them? Should I apologize? Do they hate me now? You may feel an almost automatic urge to restore harmony as quickly as possible, not because you love peace more than everyone else, but because emotional tension may feel disproportionately uncomfortable. If childhood taught you that another person's mood could determine the atmosphere of the entire environment, then conflict may not feel like an ordinary disagreement. It may feel like danger. Your body reacts before your conscious mind has had time to evaluate the situation. You become quiet. You apologize. You explain. You try to fix. You become whatever version of yourself you believe will make the tension disappear. And when the other person finally becomes calm, you feel relief. That relief can reinforce the behavior. Your nervous system learns, when conflict appears, I must immediately repair it. But not every conflict is yours to repair. Sometimes two people simply disagree. Sometimes another person is having a bad day. Sometimes someone is responsible for their own emotions. And sometimes the healthiest response isn't to fix the tension immediately. It's to tolerate the discomfort long enough to understand what is actually happening. That can be incredibly difficult for someone who has spent years believing that emotional stability depends on their ability to manage everyone around them. But with practice, you can learn something new. Other people's emotions are information. They are not always instructions. Someone can be angry, and you can remain calm. Someone can be disappointed, and you can still maintain your boundary. Someone can misunderstand you, and you don't have to immediately abandon your position just to restore peace. That is not cruelty. That is psychological differentiation, the ability to remain connected to other people without completely losing yourself inside their emotional states. And perhaps this is one of the most important things to understand about these so-called normal habits. They often aren't random. They make sense when you understand the environment in which they developed. The child who learned not to ask for help becomes the adult who handles everything alone. The child whose emotions were ignored becomes the adult who struggles to identify what they feel. The child who had to justify their preferences becomes the adult who over-explains. The child who felt like a burden becomes the adult who apologizes for existing. The child who monitored everyone else's moods becomes the adult who changes personalities depending on the room. The child whose reality was repeatedly dismissed becomes the adult who doubts their own judgment. And the child who learned that being useful earned connection becomes the adult who gives endlessly while struggling to receive. Once you see the connection, the behavior becomes less mysterious, and perhaps more importantly, it becomes less shameful. You can stop asking, why am I like this? And begin asking, when did I learn this? That question is different. It doesn't accuse you. It investigates. And investigation creates the possibility of change. Because if a behavior was learned, it can potentially be relearned. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually. One boundary, one honest answer, one accepted compliment, one request for help, one moment where you choose your preference instead of automatically choosing everyone else's. One time when you notice the urge to apologize and realize you haven't actually done anything wrong. These moments may seem insignificant, but psychologically, they can represent something much larger. They are evidence that you're no longer operating entirely from the rules you learned as a child. You're beginning to write your own rules. And that is where the difference between survival and living begins to become visible. And once you begin practicing those small changes, you may notice something else. The hardest part is often not knowing what to do differently. It is tolerating the discomfort that appears when you actually do it. You might know that you are allowed to say no, but the moment you say it, guilt appears. You might know that you are allowed to ask for help, but the moment someone offers support, you feel an urge to say, no, I'm fine. You might know that you don't need to explain every decision, but when someone questions you, your old instinct immediately starts building a defense. That discomfort can make you think you're doing something wrong. You're not. Sometimes discomfort is simply the feeling of doing something unfamiliar. Your old patterns were practiced for years. They became automatic because repetition makes behaviors easier for the brain to access. So when you begin responding differently, the new behavior may initially feel unnatural even when it is healthier for you. Think about how strange it would feel to suddenly write with your non-dominant hand after using the other hand your entire life. The difficulty wouldn't prove that the new hand was incapable. It would simply mean it wasn't practiced. The same thing can happen psychologically. If you spent years minimizing yourself, expressing a preference may feel selfish. If you spent years hiding your emotions, being emotionally honest may feel embarrassing. If you spent years solving everything alone, accepting help may feel like losing control. If you spent years anticipating rejection, trusting someone may feel dangerous even when there is evidence that they are safe. So don't interpret the discomfort as a command to return to the old pattern. Sometimes discomfort is simply evidence that you're learning something new. And this is where patience becomes important. You don't need to transform your personality overnight. You don't need to become completely confident. You don't need to suddenly become comfortable with vulnerability. You can start with something much smaller. The next time someone asks what you want, give an honest answer. The next time someone offers help, pause before refusing. The next time you make a mistake, notice whether you automatically begin defending yourself. The next time you feel the urge to apologize, ask yourself what you're actually apologizing for. And the next time someone seems upset, remind yourself that their emotion does not automatically belong to you. These tiny moments create a new experience, and repeated new experiences can gradually change the assumptions your mind has been operating from. You begin discovering that expressing a preference doesn't automatically create rejection. Asking for help doesn't automatically create disappointment. Setting a boundary doesn't automatically destroy a relationship. Being imperfect doesn't automatically make you unworthy. And receiving care doesn't automatically create a debt. These discoveries can be deeply corrective because they provide your adult mind with information that your younger self may never have received. You may also begin noticing the difference between people who genuinely respect you and people who only appreciate the version of you that never asks for anything. That realization can be uncomfortable, because when you stop being endlessly accommodating, certain relationships may change. The person who is comfortable with your silence may dislike your boundaries. The person who benefited from your constant availability may complain when you become less available. The person who expected you to solve every problem may suddenly call you selfish when you stop doing it. But someone's discomfort with your healthier boundaries does not automatically mean your boundaries are wrong. Sometimes the relationship was built around the old version of you. And when you change, the relationship has to change too. Healthy relationships can adapt. They can survive honest communication. They can make room for your needs. They don't require you to disappear in order to maintain peace. And this is why learning to receive can be just as important as learning to say no. You might become comfortable saying, "I can't do that," while still struggling to say, "Can you help me?" You may become independent enough to protect yourself, but not vulnerable enough to let someone genuinely know you. There is a difference between having boundaries and building walls. A boundary says, "This is where I end and you begin." A wall says, "Nobody gets close enough to matter." One protects connection, the other prevents it. And if you grew up learning that needing people was dangerous, walls can feel much safer than boundaries. But safety and connection don't have to be enemies. You can let trustworthy people know what you need without giving them control over you. You can allow someone to support you without becoming dependent on them. You can love people deeply while still maintaining your individuality. You can be emotionally open without revealing everything to everyone. That balance is what makes adult connection different from childhood dependence. As an adult, you have choices that you didn't have as a child. You can choose who gets access to you. You can leave unhealthy environments. You can communicate your needs. You can seek support. You can learn emotional vocabulary. You can develop relationships where your inner world is taken seriously. And perhaps most importantly, you can begin giving yourself the emotional recognition that you may have spent years waiting to receive from someone else. When you're sad, you can acknowledge that sadness instead of immediately distracting yourself. When you're angry, you can ask what boundary may have been crossed. When you're afraid, you can ask whether the danger is happening now or whether an old pattern has been activated. When you're overwhelmed, you can stop treating exhaustion as a personal failure. You can become the person who notices what is happening inside you. Not perfectly, not every time, but increasingly. And that changes the relationship you have with yourself. Because self-awareness isn't simply knowing your personality. It's being willing to stay present with your internal experience without immediately judging it, suppressing it, or turning it into someone else's problem. The child who wasn't emotionally mirrored may eventually learn to become their own mirror, not by pretending everything is fine, but by accurately seeing what is there. I am hurt. I am tired. I don't want this. I need support. I feel uncomfortable. I am proud of myself. I made a mistake. I can learn from it. These statements may sound ordinary, but for someone who learned early to disconnect from their own needs, they can represent a completely different psychological life. And perhaps the most important shift is realizing that your needs don't have to compete with everyone else's. You can care about another person's feelings and still care about your own. You can listen without absorbing. You can help without rescuing. You can love without abandoning yourself. You can be kind without being endlessly available. You can be understanding without accepting everything. You can be independent without being alone. And slowly, the old definition of strength begins to change. Strength is no longer, "I don't need anyone." It becomes, "I know what I need, I know who I can trust, and I know how to care for myself when things become difficult." That is a much more sustainable kind of strength. And perhaps this is why understanding childhood patterns matters so much. Not because every unusual habit needs to be traced back to trauma. Not because every person who apologizes frequently experienced neglect. And not because a psychology video can tell you exactly what happened in your childhood. Human behavior is complicated. The same habit can develop for many different reasons. What matters is the curiosity behind the question. Instead of labeling yourself, investigate yourself. Instead of saying, "This proves something happened to me," ask, "Does this pattern appear in my life, and how does it affect me?" That approach gives you room for nuance. You don't have to force your memories into a particular explanation. You don't have to create a painful story just because a behavior sounds familiar. You can simply observe. And if certain patterns genuinely cause distress or interfere with relationships, professional support can provide something an online video cannot. a personalized understanding of your individual history and circumstances. Because healing isn't about finding the perfect label. It's about developing a healthier relationship with yourself and with the people around you. And sometimes that process begins with the smallest realization of all. You are allowed to have needs without proving that they are important enough. But if you look at your life and realize that you learned to need less, ask for less, feel less, explain yourself constantly, or carry everything alone, then understanding that pattern can be incredibly powerful. You don't have to hate the parts of yourself that helped you survive. Your independence may have protected you. Your awareness may have helped you navigate difficult situations. Your sensitivity may have helped you understand people. Your ability to adapt may have helped you keep going. But you also don't have to carry those survival strategies forever. The goal isn't to become a completely different person. The goal is to finally give yourself permission to be the person you were never allowed to fully become. You can ask for help. You can have preferences. You can take up space. You can say no. You can receive love without feeling like you owe something in return. You can trust your own judgment while still being open to learning. And you can care about other people's emotions without making them your responsibility. Most importantly, you can begin to understand that being low maintenance, endlessly independent, or constantly useful isn't the price you have to pay to deserve love. You deserved attention when you were a child. You deserve understanding now. And perhaps healing begins when you stop asking, how can I become easier for everyone else to handle? And start asking, what would it look like to finally become safe for myself? Because the habits that once protected you don't have to control your future. You can thank them for helping you survive. And then, slowly, consciously, you can put the armor down. If this video helped you understand yourself or someone you care about, share it with them. And subscribe for more psychology-based insights into human behavior, emotional patterns, and self-awareness. You were never too much. You simply deserved more than you received, and understanding that may be the beginning of changing everything.